Welcome back to Connect and Transform. We're picking up where we left off. In today's video, we're going to do automatic scaling of the y-axis. First, a quick refresher. If I scroll up here to look at the validate graph function, recall that there's a few conditions here where we're purposely setting the step value and the max value to null. The intention is that when we call init y-axis, that calls scale y-axis, which is the one we're going to write today. And the intention is that the automatic y-axis scaling only happens if the step value, the max value, or both are missing. So we're going to start our function by saying if not graph data dot y-axis dot step value or not graph data dot y-axis dot max value. So if either or both of those is unset, then we're going to go ahead and run the code. And if they are already present and valid after the data validation function, then there's no need to inflate the y-axis. So we'll just use the settings that the user provided. So the first thing we're going to do if we are running the code is we're going to set the step value and the max value to 1. And the purpose of this function is to inflate the y-axis by setting these two values. And then we're going to have a variable, we're going to call it max data value. We're going to initialize it to 8. And then we're going to have a loop. In our loop, it's just going to be a loop on a variable called s per series. So we've seen this particular line several places in the code, looping the variable s once per series in the graph data. So now we're going to have a differentiation between whether we're looking at a stacked representation of the graph data or not. I'm going to copy this line. So we either are looking at a stacked representation, otherwise we are not. And in this loop, in the if-else, all we're doing is we're setting the max data value. So if we're not looking at a stacked representation, then we just want to get the absolute singular maximum data value in any series in the entire graph data. So that's going to be an assignment of to max data value, which is going to be equal to math.max. And it's going to be either itself, max data value. In other words, if we've seen a high value in series 1 and then nothing in series 2 is higher, we want to keep that previous value from series 1. Otherwise, we want to update it to the highest value in the one we're currently looking at, which would be math.max.apply, the math function looking at graph data dot series at position s dot data values. So that will give us a proper max data value if we're not looking at a stacked representation. If we are looking at a stacked representation, then in order to guarantee that we've inflated the y-axis enough, we need to increase max data value rather than assigning it. We need to increase it by the maximum value of the specific series we're looking at in the loop for each series. And we might overinflate the y-axis, but that's better than not inflating it enough. So what we're going to say here is we're going to say max data value is increased plus equals this number here. And that number is the maximum singular data value in the one series that we're looking at in the loop. Okay, so now we've set our max data value. Next, we're going to have a while loop. And this is the loop that's actually going to be inflating the axis. So the condition is the condition at which we've inflated it enough. So the condition will be where the max data value, the condition where we continue to inflate is as long as the max data value is greater than the current maximum y-axis value, graph data dot y-axis dot max value times some proportion, and we'll say 0.9. For example, if I wanted to guarantee that we inflated the axis enough that the entire top half would never have data in it, then I could say 0.5. If I want to guarantee that the top 20% never has data in it, I could say 0.8. I've chosen 0.9 here. So now we're going to inflate the y-axis, which means increasing the maximum value by some amount and setting the step value. I'm going to start by setting the step value because that's going to be a simpler function to perform. So that's going to be equal to math.max of something and 1, because we don't ever want the step value to be less than 1. And the other number is going to be the new maximum value. So that's going to be graph data.y-axis.max value divided by 10. So we're going to try to set the step to precisely 1/10 of the maximum value, unless that would make it less than 1, in which case the step value can be 1. Okay, so now last line of the function. We're not going to set max value, we're going to inflate max value. So plus equals, and we're going to say math.max between something and 1. We want to make sure that we're inflating the max value by at least 1. But now the goal here is we want to inflate the maximum value of the y-axis by some power of 10. And that's helpful because since we're setting the step value to the max value divided by 10, by trying to always increase it by some factor of 10, it keeps the numbers more even. So the amount that we're going to try and inflate the max value by will be math.pow. So we're going to take 10 to some power unless the result is less than 1. So for example, if we take 10 to the 0 would be equal to 1, 10 to a negative number, in that case, we would make sure to inflate max value by at least 1 so that we're guaranteed to exit the while loop at some point. So what we're going to use here is we're going to use graph data dot y-axis dot max value dot toString dot length -2. So let's go through a few examples here. Let's say that our max value is somewhere between 10 and 99. So that has a string length of 2. We're subtracting 2. So now we're taking 10 to the 0, which is equal to 1. So if that were the case, we'd only be inflating max value by 1. But let's say it's larger. Let's say it's 100 to 999. Well, now this length is 3, minus 2 is 1, so now we're taking 10 to the 1, which is 10, which is greater than 1. So now we're inflating the max value by 10. And then you can imagine it just gets larger and larger as the scale increases. I'm going to tab that over because unless I've made a typo, it is done. Okay, I must have forgotten to escape an important character on 148. Oh. I just had characters in the wrong order. I thought I copied this line from another piece of the code. Did I not? Anyway, there we go. Okay, so let's take a look at this and see if it's actually working as we expect. So let's pay most attention to the second graph from the top, which is pulling ID2, which is using this data, which is looking at these data values. So we see right off the bat, the highest data value is 61, and the maximum y-axis here is 72, which is just a little bit higher than that. Let's increase it to 661, and we'll refresh. So now we see this maximum value is 740, and the step is 74. All these numbers are even. Let's say, for example, 5,000. Okay, so now it's chosen a max value of 5,600. Let's say 50,000. Okay, and now it's chosen 56,000. Now I'm curious, if I change the units to dollars, let's refresh. Okay, I'm gonna have to check on that because I thought we had written all the functions to format the axis. But I edited the wrong, I edited ID 22, not ID 2. Okay, so we'll add $, refresh. Okay, so now we see 56,000. So it looks like it's working. Let me change this back down to like 3. So now everything is below 10, and we refresh. Okay, and now we see 9. So yeah, it looks like it's working. Maybe I'll just do one more test. We'll just say 300, refresh, and there you go, 340 with a step of 34. So now we have automatic Y scaling. Oh, maybe one thing I'll show is if I set the step value, let's say I'm going to set that to 30, and then I'm going to set the max value to 300 and 60. And there we go. We see a step of 30 and max of 360. And in fact, I will set this equal to the highest data value, which is 300. And I'll show that it should accept what I'm giving it rather than inflating the axis. And there we go. We see that it's 300. And maybe just for fun, I'll force the data to exceed the y-axis, but all the minimum step and maximum that I gave are all correct, and they all work well together. So the inflation function was not called. So yeah, that's it. Seems to be working, and if either of those are null, then it will inflate. So I'll give it a max value of 3,000 and refresh, and we see it's chosen 3,400. So there you have it, automatic y-axis scaling. Thanks for watching.